Welcome back to Books and Coffee. Today we are going to discuss some important literary terms which are repeatedly asked in UGC NET English. Here we are using Abrams, a glossary of literary terms as our core text. So let's begin. Stream of consciousness. Stream of consciousness is a technique that captures the flow of a character's thoughts, blending memories, impressions, and feelings without structural interruptions. So here, the thoughts lack a proper order or structure. It is more fragmented in its nature. Maybe a character might be started thinking in the point of A, then directly jumps to the point D, then P, Z. We can't see a proper structure or order. For example, Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway, James Joyce's Ulysses. The main characters are examples for stream of consciousness. Now we have Elegy. Elegy is a poem of grief that moves from grief to reflection. It's more like a morning song. So here the poems are written in the memory of someone who is actually dead. For example, Lycidas by John Milton. Here Milton wrote this elegy, and the memory of Edward King is actually a friend of Milton at Cambridge who drowned when his ship sank in the Irish Sea off the coast of Wales. So elegy is more like a song of grief. Then we have pastoral poetry. This kinds of poetry idealizes rural life and nature, often contrasting it with the complexities of urban life. So pastoral poetry is more in favor of rural life. Example we can see in Edmund Spenser's Shepherd's Calendar, Christopher Marlowe's The Passionate Shepherd to His Love. And we have Synecdoche. Synecdoche is a figure of speech which uses a part to represent the whole, while metonymy replaces something with a related concept. These two figures of speeches actually seems confusing for many people, but yeah, it's actually easy. Synecdoche uses a part to represent the whole. For example, mouth to feed, which indicates hungry people. Here we can see a part to represent the whole. And there is this phrase which goes like all hands on deck, which directly means whole crew, like a part to represent the whole. While metonymy, an example, a crown, which indicates royal authority, which means a crown replaces something with a related concept. For example, Hollywood to refer the American film industry. Now we have catharsis. Catharsis is the emotional release experienced by the audience of a tragedy, especially pity and fear. Catharsis is the release of pent-up emotions, which can be experienced through physical actions like screaming or exercising, or through emotional engagement with art like crying at a sad movie or reading a tragic story. A simple example is punching a pillow to release anger, while a literary example is the feeling of release after watching a tragedy like Oedipus Rex, where the audience processes complex emotions of loss and suffering through the character's downfall. So it's more like an emotional release experienced by the audience. Now we have Anachronism. Anachronism is the placement of an object or event outside its correct historical time. For example, canons in Macbeth. The play Macbeth, we can see canons are placed. Though the set in the 11th century, the play features characters talking about cannon fire, which actually wasn't introduced to Europe until the 14th century. So here the placement of cannons is kind of outside its correct historical time. Now we have conceit. Conceit is an elaborate, extended metaphor, especially in metaphysical poetry. So it's more like a metaphor but extend it. For example, in Andrew Marvell's poem, The Definition of Love, the poet compares the lovers to parallel lines. And in John Donne's A Valediction Forbidden Mourning, here the poet compares lovers to the legs of a compass. It's more like an extended metaphor. Conceit is an extended metaphor, which is actually we can see in metaphysical poems. Now we have blank verse. Blank verse is unrhymed iambic pentameter, and free verse has no fixed rhyme or meter but maintains rhythmic structure. We can see the opening of Shakespeare's To Be or Not to Be. These are examples for blank verse. And Milton's epic poem Paradise Lost is written entirely in blank verse. Now we have Diegesis. Diegesis refers to the world within the story, including events and characters. Diegesis is the narration of a story by a narrator who tells the reader what is happening and sometimes what characters are thinking. So it in a way encompasses the entire fictional world of the story, including the setting, events and characters, and is contrasted with mimesis. So, mimesis represents the showing, but diegesis represents the telling. It's more like the narrator who tells the reader what is happening. A classic example is the usual opening which we used to hear in this fairy tale movies, or here in the beginning of the fairy tale movies, or some random stories like Once Upon a Time. So, and this is actually an example for diegesis. Now we have objective correlative. Objective correlative is T.S. Eliot's idea that emotion is best expressed through a set of objects or events that evoke the feeling in the reader. So the goal is to show emotion rather than tell it, by creating an external formula that the reader can connect with. So the external elements must provide a sensory experience. For example, the authors like Thomas Mann in Death in Venice successfully use the technique by employing an external detail that is nothing but a bright, breezy day. So this is used to evoke a specific feeling. So we always need an external element to show the emotion of the character. That is the whole idea of objective correlative. So Eliot considered works like Hamlet to be a failure in this regard because the intense emotions of the characters were not adequately represented by the external events or objects or other characters in the play. So this is the whole idea of objective correlative by T.S. Eliot. Now we have two kinds of fallacies in new criticism. One is intentional fallacy and the other one is affective fallacy. These fallacies are introduced by William K. Wimsatt and Monroe C. Birchsley. So let's have a look at intentional fallacy. Intentional fallacy warns against interpreting a work based on author's intention. Like imagine we are reading a romantic novel and making assumptions and judgments that the author might be a romantic person. That's why he or she crafted such a romantic work of art. So Wimsatt and Birchsley are suggesting that readers to not to judge the intentions of the author or the historical context in which the book was written. On the other hand, affective fallacy warns against interpreting it based on readers' emotional response. Like we can't just say the movie Titanic is really good just because we cried after watching the film. So new criticism gives importance to the autonomy of the work and claims works are autotelic in its nature. It shouldn't depend on the intention of the author or the emotions of the reader. So these are intentional fallacy or affective fallacy. Now we have Hamartia. Hamartia is the tragic flaw or error in judgment that leads to the hero's downfall. Aristotle also adds Anagnorisis, that is the moment of recognition, and Peripeteia, the reversal of fortune. Together, these define the structure of classical tragedy. For example, in Oedipus Rex by Sophocles, we can see the main character Oedipus' tragic flow when he killed his father and later married his mother Jocasta, even though he wasn't aware of it. So this is the tragic flow, or Hamartia. And he got Anagnorisis, that is the moment of recognition or self-discovery, when he realized the stranger he killed was his father and the queen he married to was his own mother. So the guilt of patricide and incest resulted in his Peripeteia, the reversal of fortune. So that is Hamartia, Anagnorisis, and Peripeteia. Now we have pathetic fallacy. Pathetic fallacy is the practice of attributing human emotion to nature, such as angry sea. Like if we can take an example from Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights. So there is a mention of a violent thunderstorm occurs at the moment Heathcliff leaves Wuthering Heights, which in a way showing Cathy's emotional turmoil. So we are attributing violence to thunderstorm. Nothing. It is a practice of attributing human emotion to nature. That is pathetic fallacy. Bildungsroman. Bildungsroman is the coming-of-age novel, tracing the moral and psychological growth of a young protagonist. So this kinds of novel follows a witty or kind of a roguish hero through episodic adventures. One example is the character Pip from Charles Dickens' Great Expectation. So we can see chronicles of coming of age of Pip, an orphan, as he navigates social class and love. Also, Little Women by Louisa May Alcott, we can see the novel completely focuses on the lives and maturation of the four March sisters. And now we have dramatic irony. So dramatic irony focuses when the audience knows something that the characters do not. For example, in Oedipus Rex, we can see the audience knows from the beginning that Oedipus has unknowingly killed his father and married his mother, but Oedipus himself is ignorant of his true identity throughout the play. As we are discussing Oedipus Rex an example, please note that Oedipus complex also appears in exams related to psychoanalytic criticism, referring to a child's unconscious desire toward one parent and rivalry with others. Now let's move on to structuralism. Structuralism is a method that studies literature like a system of science. Meaning doesn't sit inside the text but in how elements relate to each other. Think of Ferdinandi, Saussure, binaries, patterns, and the whole structure of a story thing. Now we have post-structuralism. Post-structuralism is structuralism's rebellious child. It basically says meanings are unstable, language is slippery, and texts can never be pinned down. Examples of post-structuralism in literature include analyzing how a text's meaning is unstable and depends on the reader, as in Roland Barthes' The Death of the Author, and deconstructing the binary oppositions and multiple meanings of word like the Abbott and Costello's Who's on First sketch, and applying post-structuralist theory on a text's social, cultural, and political context, such as Paul Demann's work on figurative language or Gayatri Spivak's analysis on colonial power dynamics. Here, Roland Barthes' essay, The Death of the Author, argues that once a text is published, it belongs to the author. It belongs to the reader, not the author, and that the author as an omniscient authority of meaning is a myth. So once the text is published, it completely belongs to the reader, not the author. So the death of the author. Now we have deconstruction. Deconstruction is not destruction. In fact, it exposes contradictions and hidden assumptions in texts. This is the analysis of how a text's meaning is unstable, relying on a system of differences where a word's meaning is defined by what it is not. It is actually introduced by Jacques Derrida. And we have New Historicism. New Historicism links literary works with the social power structures surrounding them. So texts and history are treated as equal cultural artifacts. Stephen Greenblatt is your main guy here. So you can expect questions related to New Historicism. For example, Shakespeare's Richard II is to show how a play's content was influenced by and reflected the political climate of Elizabethan England, especially the fear of succession crisis. So, how the play and history are treated equal as cultural artifacts. So, this is actually dealt by New Historicism. Also, we have this poem, Langston Hughes' Harlem. So we can analyze this poem in the context of the Harlem Renaissance to understand its themes of racial identity and displacement. So this study is called as New Historicism. And we have reader response criticism. Meaning happens when the reader meets the text. So your interpretation is not just allowed but required. So think eyes are fish and the whole active reader agenda when you are looking at reader response criticism. And we have psychoanalytic criticism. Think of Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung, Lacan while we are looking at psychoanalytic criticism. So here characters, authors and sometimes readers are treated as case studies. So unconscious desires, archetypes, repression, symbolism, all are part of psychoanalytic criticism. Examples of psychoanalytic criticism in literature include analyzing Shakespeare's Hamlet for the Oedipus complex, or Charlotte Perkins Gilman's The Yellow Wallpaper for the narrator's descent into madness due to repressed desires, and Kafka's The Metamorphosis for the symbolism of Gregor Samsa's transformations. So these interpretations explore how a character's unconscious mind, desires and traumas manifest through their actions and relationships in the story. So such study is called as psychoanalytic criticism. And we have Russian formalism, which is a school of thought that believed literature should be studied for its literariness. Concepts like defamiliarization, fabula versus sujet comes from here. And New Criticism. New Criticism is all about close reading. The text is the center. So you don't need to drag in the author's childhood trauma or the historical background. Terms like paradox, ambiguity and tension comes from this camp. Now we have archetypal criticism. Archetypal criticism includes myths, symbols, and collective unconscious. Northrop Frye's important area is archetypal criticism. And yes, NET syllabus is more into archetypal criticism. In fact, we can see a lot of questions that are oftenly asked from this part. And examples of archetypal criticism in literature include identifying universal character types like hero, like Beowulf, or like wise old man like Gandalf. It's all about a universal character types. It also involves analyzing recurring plot patterns such as the hero's journey, death and rebirth, or the task as seen in the course of Harry Potter and all. So these archetypes connect with the audiences on a deep universal level by tapping into common human experiences and emotions. Like in Indian context, think about the archetype like Rama as a good king, Sita as a very chaste, good wife, such archetypes. And now we have intertextuality, like texts talk to other texts. Nothing is original. Everything echoes something else. This is Julia Kristeva's favorite reminder. Examples of intertextuality in literature include Jean Rice's White Sargassy, which retells the story of a mad woman in the attic from Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre. Like, one text talk to other texts. Like, we can see, like, it's more like a research. We are taking from this inspiration, that idea, and all clubbed together as one. James Joyce's Ulysses, which retells the Homer's Odyssey in modern Dublin. Or John Steinbeck's East of Eden, which is based on the biblical story of Cain and Abel from the book of Genesis. Other examples include using allusions, adaptations, and reimaginings across different works and media. Hermeneutics. It is the art of interpretation. Gadamer and Ricoeur explore how understanding is shaped by history, language, and experience. So examples in literature include analyzing ancient texts like the Vedas or the Bible to understand their original context and meaning, using in the hermeneutics circle to interpret a text by considering how its parts related to the whole, and applying different literary theories to a single work, such as analyzing a Shakespearean play through different historical, psychological, or social lenses. Heteroglossia Dialogism. These are Bakhtin's contributions. So multiple voices exist within a text, shaping meaning through interaction rather than authority. Examples of heteroglossia in literature include Toni Morrison's Beloved, which uses different voices from former slaves, their children and descendants, and Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird, showcasing distinct dialects and speech patterns based on social class and background. And we can again see in Anthony Burgess' A Clockwork Orange, which uses the invented language of sad to represent a subculture. So these works use multiple languages or voices within a single text to create a dialogue between different perspectives, social classes, or ideologies. So these are the examples for heteroglossia and dialogism. And those are the high-yield, net-friendly terms from M.H. Abrams that actually matter. And if you want a part 2 with even messier theory, let me know. Thanks for watching and happy studying.